There are quite a few people overlapping, taking two classes, my previous class and this one as well. So whatever joke I made or failed joke I made in the previous lecture can't carry over to this one. But I saw quite a few of you here actually doing the recruiting new members for clubs as well, right? Did anyone here, other than Monotonic, obviously I saw, do that over the past week? No? Anyone trying to play Jason Mraz really badly and trying to get the band, or no one? No? Okay. Right. So, well, without further ado, let's begin. Oh, by the way, I may have to, I mean, this is really far away, but in about week 9 or 10, my previous job was at the Korea Military Academy, and they have sent me a 공문, or the official document saying whether the cadets could experience a guest lecture here outside. They're coming to see my English lecture, and then so there might be some people seating in uniform, slightly different to that, just for one lecture, and ask for your. I mean, it's not going to have any impact on, you know, there will be enough seats for them as well, so there shouldn't be too much of a problem. But I ask for your understanding. That will just be a one-off thing. It wouldn't happen any other time. And I don't think your rights as students are majorly violated by anything there. So hopefully, I'll let you know nearer the time. And some of them are not quite 성준기 good looking, but they are reasonably good. There are one or two that are really good looking, so I can heartily recommend, especially for those female audience students here among you. That's something to think about, especially if you're either single or looking on a rebound relationship or anything like that, then there we are. Okay, well, that's that. Now, preference-wise, we're going to cover quite a bit today. But as I said at the end of last lecture, this is going to be my starting point. I said I would go over the three main assumptions of a consumer's preference relationship, right? Now, first one was this completeness. Can anyone try and explain to the rest of the class what this meant? Okay, so you might either prefer good 1 to good 2, you might prefer good 2 to good 1, you might be indifferent, but the key is I'm requiring that you have to have an opinion. Okay? So what I'm saying is, if I were to say, ask 안창규 학생이죠, 그죠? 안창규 학생이 say, now suppose I'm taking you out for a Chinese meal over lunch. What do you want to have? And generally now it's courtesy, Korean way of saying is, I don't mind. I'll order what you do. Now that's essentially saying that that in the world of preference relationship has to mean that he's indifferent between any other option. 마파두부밥 or 잡탕밥 or I don't know, 굴짬뽕 or why am I talking Chinese here? Or 기스면 or whatever. Yeah? It doesn't mean that he doesn't have an opinion on that. It must mean that he's indifferent. Okay? You have to have an opinion, which is unfortunately one thing that we Koreans lack generally, having an opinion on the matter. Now, reflexivity. So, okay. As I said, this is a very children tend to break this a lot. So just a little episode of my babysitting yesterday was that my child was in the middle of one of her terrible twos, or 미운 3살 mode. Do you want a candy? No, 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 no. And then just like that. And then I told, so you want to have pineapple juice? Is that what you want? And she said, yes. And then I gave it to her, and then she said, no, I don't want pineapple juice. You wanted it just like 1 minute ago. I mean, okay, maybe her preference may have changed in the meantime, but more likely it's a violation of the reflexivity principle. Yeah, any bundle has to be as good as itself, or against killing one person. It's the same problem, but just expressed differently. You have to have same opinion. 2% fat versus 98% fat-free. A very, very nice way of marketing using this is generally, now if you buy a 500 ml beverage of any sort, it says it's only about, say, 60 calories or something, okay? But in the tiniest little bit of letter, it says per serving, 1회당. And generally, they define a serving as 250 ml. Most companies do. I mean, whoever opens a 500 milliliter bottle of, say, Gatorade or Pocari Sweat and then doesn't finish it and just have a half a serving, yeah? But by not stating that it is the entire bottle is 120 cal instead of 60, and just say 60 cal per half a bottle, it can change a people's decision and say, oh, I might buy a bottle rather than a can. That's a failure of the reflexivity principle. Transitivity, I think I asked 한주선 학생 yesterday, on Wednesday, right? My daughter, once again, giantly broke this transitivity principle when I asked her earlier today, 지수야, do you prefer 뽀로로 or 타요? And she said, 뽀로로. What about 타요 and 폴리? And she said, 폴리. Or they say 타요. What about 폴리 and 뽀로로? And she said, 폴리. Breaking the transitivity principle. She just answers whichever comes first and then just like, yeah, repeats that all the time, basically. So completeness, reflexivity, transitivity are the central three things that always have to be there. They always have to be there for you to have a meaningful preference relationship. Yes, Rafael, do you have a question or just, yeah, okay. Just itchy, I guess. Right, so then we can define something called a indifferent curve, or indifference curve, rather. Indifference curve. In Korean, they're translated as, anyone knows? 무차별곡선, right? Now, in Korean, it says 무차별곡선. 무차별 means indiscriminate. So it's not a literal translation per se. And 무차별 in Korean means really different concept. Yeah? Indiscriminate is, you know, like, you hear that word on the news when, like, in a like a U.S. shooting in Virginia Tech or something like that, where it said, oh, the shooter shot students indiscriminately or anything like that. So it's a really bad translation. Each indifference curve also represents a unique level of pleasure or satisfaction. So if X is here, but if another consumption bundle is not on indifference curve, it means that they cannot be indifferent. That's all I'm saying at this point. I'm not saying the more is better or anything like that. 뭐 더 많을수록 더 좋다 이런 얘기 아직 안 했습니다. All I'm saying is if you're not on a particular indifference curve, it means you can't be indifferent between a good that is on the curve and another good that is not on the curve. Is this clear? Yep. So if you prefer having more of each to less, then clearly you would prefer if you get more of X1 and X2. So think of it like 소맥, then, you know, having 1 glass of soju and 1 glass of 맥주, you would prefer having 2 glasses of soju and 2 glasses of 맥주. The more, the better. The more, the merrier. The more, the happier. The more your life is great. Yeah? Now, so at this stage, we can already talk about one important property of indifference curve. Namely, two indifference curves cannot cross ever. 서로가 서로를 이렇게 지나갈 수는 없습니다. Why? Because, well, y is not on the indifference curve that passes through x. Correct? So given that what I just said earlier, x and y cannot be indifferent. Otherwise, it should be on this curve, right? But because x and z are on the same indifference curve, x and z are indifferent. Z and y are indifferent. So by transitivity, x and y must also be indifferent. Correct? But we began with the assumption that x cannot be indifferent to y. So we have a contradiction. That's the reason why if I ever see indifference curves being crossed against each other in your exam answers, that will be an automatic deduction of points, unfortunately. Indifference curve can never, ever, 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 ever cross. Now, there are lots of different examples of preferences we can think about. Okay? This is a sort of an example I just thought of about half an hour ago. Okay. Suppose that the summer holiday is coming up and is going on a holiday to the US with, say, a few other friends, okay? So who brings a pen if you're going on a backpacking trip? You don't, do you? So you go on that United Airlines flight, you're sitting all on the same row, 9 of you. You're heading for San Francisco, wherever. Generally, San Francisco is first port of call. And you have to fill out the landing card. It can be completed, suppose, in black or blue. Does it matter to you if I give you a black pen or a blue pen? No, it doesn't, does it? Yeah? So in that case, only the number of pens matter. It doesn't matter whether it's black or blue. So if you think of x1 as blue and x2 as black, I can give you 3 black pens or 3 blue pens, and it gives me equal amount of pleasure. 2 blue, 1 black, or 1 black, 2 blue, whatever, it doesn't matter. These are called perfect substitutes. Okay? Another example I can find in real life is, now whenever I do laundry, you have to put in some fabric softener, right? There are always 2 versions, concentrate version and the normal version. I don't know why they make the 2 different stuff, but they're exactly the same in terms of chemical compound wise. They do the same wash, they do the same job, but you can just put 10 ml of concentrate and it will do the wash, 50 ml of the normal stuff and it will do the wash. Okay? Then, me giving you a 100 milliliter bottle of concentrate fabric softener or 500 ml normal bottle of fabric softener, doesn't matter. You can do 10 washes, stop. Yeah? That's what we mean by perfect substitutes. You don't really care between the 2. But we can't find that many examples in human life. We generally tend to have a slight preference over the other. Yeah? But it is theoretically possible. When I was in the Army Academy, I always used the example of, giving out your platoon infantry M16s or K2s. It doesn't matter. A rifle is a rifle, full stop. Okay? So perfect complements-wise, okay, another army example here. Suppose that you're a company commander. You hand out 10 rifles, or whatever, 130 rifles, but you don't give out any bullets. No one can fight a war. Suppose you give them 300 rounds of bullets, but no rifles. Doesn't win a war either. You have to consume the goods in together to be useful. Printer and toner, car and gasoline. These are perfect complements. You always have to consume at a particular rate. Yep. So suppose that my printer in my room takes one cyan, one magenta, one yellow, and one black toner. So one printer, 4 toners. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So you have to consume at a rate of 1 printer and 4 toners. It doesn't matter if I have about a stack of 120 toners. It's not going to help me do the job in terms of printing out articles as quickly as possible. Or it doesn't matter if I get 30 printers if I don't have a toner. I can't print out anything either. So that's what we mean by perfect complement. You have to consume 2 goods at a pre-specified particular rate. Now, in textbooks, they always use this example of left shoe against right shoe. Yeah? But, you know, I mean, can anyone else think of an example of perfect complement that we haven't talked about so far? Anyone? Sorry? Pen and ink. Or 샤프 and 샤프심, or something like that. Or anything else? Otherwise, other than just looking stupid, just waving around like that. Or having just shuttlecocks are not useful either. Yeah? So that's what we mean by perfect complements. What do we mean by neutrals? Well, when I go in Chinese restaurants with my wife, I don't really care about those the little pickles that they give out. I hardly ever eat it, just my personal preference. So it doesn't matter whether they give me 1 dish of pickle, 3 dishes of pickle. It really doesn't matter at all. You know, I mean, what I care about is how much 탕수육 is on the table, how much ganpungi is on the table. That I care a lot. But pickles, nah, really. Those goods are called neutral. Can you see why then indifference curve takes this shape? You only care about x1. So however much amount of x2 you have is absolutely irrelevant to your level of satisfaction. You only become better if you happen to have more ganpungi, more 탕수육. Okay, today's my, okay, up until Wednesday, I was fixated with chimek, but now I've moved on to Chinese for some reason. So I have to find a non-food related example here somehow, okay? Now, there are also things called bads. Bads are goods that actually pull you down in terms of your satisfaction, utility. So think of it like, okay, if you can think of your compostable food waste as a good, okay? I don't know why there would be a price on it, but that would be a bad. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but some of you must be living alone at the moment, right? Then filling out that 2-liter, 3-liter the bag of food waste can be an absolute hell, right? You have to freeze it in your freezer, and then you forget about it, and then like the moment of panic when you realize that the nice pound of sirloin steak that your mom sent you, that you froze for future use, is sitting right next to your food waste from last week. Just not good, is it? So that's a sort of a good that will decrease your pleasure. So in this instance, think of good 2 either as a food waste or pollution. The less of it you have, the better you are. Makes sense, right? And then there's also a satiation, or I mean, it's saying that there's a particular point of bliss. Yeah? So let's think of lads' night out, drinking with friends as example, okay? I mean, I always have a friend, I mean, every one of you will have a friend like this, okay? I have a friend who goes back to like 15 years of friendship, far too long. And he's a sort of a guy who just doesn't know how to stop when it comes to drinking. And it's like giving a child with PlayStation box an unlimited amount of television time, but he's now a very successful startup entrepreneur. Quite a bit of money in his own hand. He broke up with his girlfriend just a bit ago. So I was, there's a Facebook picture of it actually. Me and my close friends were having a dinner together, and he brought about 4 bottles of whiskey, cognac, etc., for 6 guys to consume between. Clearly, I didn't have that much because my child was with me, but he just would drink and drink and drink and drink and drink. And then there's always a maximal amount of pleasure. But beyond that point, your life is hell the day after. Yeah? You would throw up, you would have so much hangover, you'd just be like, just kill me now sort of mode, right? Another example would be, now I was teaching in the Army Cadet Academy, and this 14th of March is not a white day, if you like. They always call it a pie day. Have you ever done this in, like, I mean, some of you who's been to boys only high school know this, but the numerical value for pi is what, 3.1415926537 something, yeah? So there's the first 3 numerical values. The first 3 significant points are 314. So 14th of March, they designated as a pi day, where basically the seniors and juniors stuff the first year cadets with as much this thing called choco pie as possible. Now, one of them is pleasant, 2, 3, 4 is pleasant, but after having about 12 or 14, generally it becomes really obnoxious. You would want to throw up, but they really don't allow you to throw up. So there's a certain point where your pleasure is at your maximum, and then goes like, boom, really bad. Okay? So I would say that human beings' preferences are generally close. This is probably about the most realistic scenario for human beings, yeah? I mean, but in economics, we assume, for simplicity, that the more is better. So if I were to give 한주선 학생이죠, 맞아. Okay, I'm getting better with names now. If I were to give 한주선 학생, let's not use food example. Okay, so 3 pairs of shoes and 5 bottles of nice cosmetics. That's good. But if I were to give 7 pairs of shoes and 10 bottles of cosmetic products, that's even better. Okay? It doesn't, I mean, in reality, it wouldn't be, because cosmetic products generally have a sell-by date. So you wouldn't be able to use your hydrating cream or whatever if it's like 2 years ago already. It's 2 years sell-by date. But the reason we assume this is that it's at your disposal. You can give it away to your friends if you like and derive pleasure from it. But just having more gives you more option to do pleasurable, more satisfying, better things. You can give it away to charity and derive pleasure from it. You can give it away to your friends. You can, I don't know, you can use those pairs of shoes and build a, I don't know, whatever, just, you can, I don't know what you can do with 7, 10 pairs of shoes. I mean, I probably have to ask my wife. But, okay, so that's what we mean by monotonicity. The more, the better. In other words, if I were to give you more of X1 and X2, you always derive greater pleasure, greater satisfaction of it. That's what we mean by a well-behaved preference. Okay? No. I've discussed that there are numerous different indifference examples that we can think about in reality. But for the remainder of the analysis, for the main body of the rest of the analysis, we're going to focus our attention on these well-behaved preferences. 그러니까 just in Korean for 1 minute, okay? 그 우리말로 얘기를 하면 선호 체계가 굉장히 사람은 다양할 수 있습니다. 뭐 퍼펙트, 뭐 완전 대체제, 완전 보완제 다양할 수 있는데 그 중에서도 수학적으로 풀기 편하고 되게 그냥 어쨌든 모델링 하는 데 있어서 가장 편한, 그래서 향후에 우리가 앞으로 챕터를 나아감에 있어서 쓰기 편한 게 바로 요 well-behaved preference이기 때문에 요거에 집중을 하겠다. 근데 그러려면 두 가지 어썸션이 더 필요합니다. 그 중에 첫 번째를 지금 얘기한 거예요. Okay, so satiation, for example, doesn't imply monotonicity. No, it doesn't. This definitely doesn't imply the more the better. If you're at a point of bliss and you have more alcohol, so suppose if I had 1 bottle of whiskey already and I get 1 more glass of whiskey, I would hate that. That gives me less pleasure, not more. So that breaks the monotonicity assumption. So this is not a well-behaved preference. No, it doesn't. It doesn't violate. No. How would it violate transitivity? Think of that and come back to me at the end of the class, okay? It doesn't. Yeah? So preferences can be anything. There can be lots and lots of different things, but we're going to focus on these small class of subset of indifference curves called well-behaved preference curves. So the first assumption was monotonicity. Yeah, so we're going to talk about that towards the end of the lecture, how you can translate this preference relationship into utility. So yeah, but that's thinking ahead. That's nice. Great, thank you. Right. Another question? Anyone? Okay, so monotonicity is one additional assumption I'm going to make. Second is important. I'm going to explain this in words first, and then I'm going to give you a formal definition. Averages are better than extremes. I mean, we would like to have a lot of money. Okay, that's true, but money is not a good in itself. We use that to consume something. Yeah? When it comes to consumption-wise, generally, having a little bit of everything is better. Yeah? I mean, you can think, essentially, I mean, we can talk about this to talk about a lot of social problems and stuff like that. House poor, for example, is an indication of this. You have a house, but you're spending so damn much money on repaying the loans on it that you can't spend anything else. That's not a healthy human preference. We just tend to prefer having a well-balanced consumption of everything. Nice coat, nice shoes, nice cosmetics, nice food, nice trip abroad, nice tennis racket, nice whatever. Yeah? A little bit of everything is better than just having one thing to the extreme. Correct? So mathematically speaking, if x1, x2, and y1, y2 lie on the same indifference curve, then having an average of the two, or any weighted average, it can be 1/3 and 2/3, or 2/3 and 1/3, or whatever. Yeah? Any weighted average between the two must be preferred to just having x1, x2, or y1, y2. That's why I summarized this in one sentence. Averages are better than extremes. Okay? It's our human instinct. So it's like this. If you are consuming, if I'm giving you the option to consume either X or Y, then I suddenly give you an option to consume half X and half Y. That always leads me to enjoy a greater amount of satisfaction than if I were to just consume X or Y alone. Averages are better. In Korean for about 30 seconds, X하고 Y가 있을 때 그 x하고 y를 컴바인해서 세 번째, 그러니까 서로를 섞어가지고 다른 무언가 어떤 소비할 수 있는 번들, 베스킷을 만들 수 있잖아요. 그거는 항상 x만 소비하거나 x 지점에서 소비하거나 y 지점에서 소비하는 것보다는 낫다라는 얘기죠. 익스트림에 있는 것보다는 평균 쪽으로 옮겨가는 게 나한테는 더 많은 만족감을, 더 많은 효용을 준다는 얘기입니다. Nothing difficult there, right? So averages are better than extremes, obviously. But this is what I want to draw your attention to. The slope of the indifference curve is often referred to as the marginal rate of substitution. Okay? It measures the rate at which the consumer is willing to substitute between two goods. So we had a similar concept last Wednesday. We talked about relative price between two goods. You know, 치맥 example. A bottle of beer costs 3,000 won. A whole chicken from BBQ costs 15,000 won. So the market is willing to trade at a rate of 5 beer to 1 chicken, right? That's the market as a whole, externally, objectively. But you yourself have your own rate of substitution. Okay? So you, 이경재 학생, for example, might feel that beer, you know, if you don't really like drinking, 5 beer to 1 chicken, not really for me, you know, like I'll be happy to just get 1 chicken and I'll be willing to give up, say, about 10 beers, and that would still make me indifferent. That would still make me feel as satisfied as before. So that MRS, it's the abbreviation for that. That MRS really measures the rate at which you yourself, you as a person, as a consumer, are subjectively, internally willing to trade between two goods to remain as satisfied as before. Okay, so let me put it another way, okay? Now, if you give up a little amount of good one, say, being cosmetic product, like, so if I don't buy that BB cream or whatever, how much more, okay, let's not use food, how much more in terms of clothing, or just, you know, I don't know, a nice jacket for the spring, should I get to make me feel as happy as before? That's what we mean by marginal rate of substitution. And it's clearly this, the slope of the indifference curve. Yeah? Because giving up little amount of x1 and by consuming more of x2 at this particular rate allows me to remain on the same indifference curve as before. 같은 무차별 곡선이 남아있잖아요. That means I'm happy as before. I've gave up a little amount of good one. I got more good two in return. And as a result, I'm as happy as before. I'm in a good place. Yeah? So that's what we mean by this marginal rate of substitution. Please remember this, because MRS is going to make a massive reappearance along with the slope of the budget constraint when we talk about optimality. Okay? So convex preference means that the consumer has diminishing marginal rates of substitution. Okay? So let's go back to that weird example that I gave Yoon 학생 just now. Okay? Suppose x1 is sushi. Suppose x2 is the cream pasta. Okay? Now, if I'm forcing Yoon 학생 to eat sushi every day of the week, she's willing to give up a lot of amount of sushi to just step away from there. Yeah? Okay. Just let me okay, just let me have that little bowl of pasta. The idea of having one more bit of raw fish is really making me feel uncomfortable. I don't want it. It gives me very little pleasure because I'm already at a place where I'm having a lot of sushi. In that case, I'll be willing to give up a large amount of X1 sushi to obtain just a little amount of pasta. Correct? But let's move to about somewhere here. This is where I'm forcing Yoon Jiang 학생 to consume mostly pasta, okay? And she's enjoying that one little bowl of sushi, okay? And now I'm even taking that away. How much would I have to compensate her in terms of pasta? Clearly a lot, yeah? So in other words, when I'm consuming a little amount of something, I value that a lot. I value that really, really much. It's like this. Suppose that, and that's really obvious when my family go on play dates with children. Yeah. Now, I don't know why, but my daughter's really into like cars and buses. So she has about like 7 or 8 these little toy cars. Okay. But when a friend comes along, she's very happy to give out in return for Tayo or Polly or Pororo related products, which she doesn't have that many of. It's a famous Korean animation character, which is like basically neutralizes, satisfies, makes peace, pacifies every children between the age of 2 and 4. Anything above age 4, it doesn't work. Yeah? But yeah. So it's really evident when we look at the behavior of children. I mean, the children are behaving closest to our own human instinct. If we have a lot of the same thing, we're willing to give up really readily in exchange for something new. But if I have one toy car left to me, I ain't gonna give that up that easily unless something really good is on offer, right? That's what we mean by this diminishing marginal rate of substitution. Okay? So that is, I think, just about everything you need to know in terms of preference. But, okay, so I've just written this down in words once again. So if the consumer is consuming little amount of good 1 and a lot of good 2, then he will not be willing to give up good 1 easily because it's you already have a very little amount. I'm not going to give that up that quickly, that easily. But if I have abundant amount of good 1, hey, I have more than enough milk for myself, yeah, just take it, take it. Yeah, you don't need to give me that much. We are like that, okay? So now we go to the what is chapter 4 in our textbook and begin to answer Anders's question just early on in the lecture. So we now translate preference into something called utility. The concept of this utility is a hugely old and incredibly philosophical one. It was at the backbone of the political philosophy that stemmed out from, well, really from the time of Plato and Aristotle, okay? So if you took the morale and citizenships class in high school, then we begin to talk about this thing called utilitarianism. And then the biggest names in utilitarianism are Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, who wrote actually a hugely influential book called On Utilitarianism. Yeah. Now, there's an interesting fact on Jeremy Bentham. He didn't want to just, at the time of his death, he didn't want to be laid down into a grave somewhere and be forgotten. So he demanded that his body be mummified, 밀랍이 된 다음에, and is still sitting at the university meeting chamber of University College London. So Jeremy Bentham's name is still present on the meeting minutes as present. And then now, but he's out of there because in 1990 something or 2000 somewhere, a random student vandalized the body. I don't know why would anyone do that, but since then it's been in a university exhibition somewhere else, but with greater security. Yeah. So if you took that course in high school, we would know about the very basic premise of utilitarianism. Okay? Or if you took online lecture of Michael Sandel's course on justice, this always comes up. Greatest amount of happiness for the greatest amount of people. Greatest number of people, sorry. Yep. But the trouble is, how do we even measure people's happiness? Yeah? So, 김태형 학생이죠. Suppose I say, how would you quantify eating a bar of Snickers? Can you how would you describe the amount of happiness you feel? You can't really, can you? Yeah? I mean, happiness is a concept we know to our heart. We know when we are happy. Well, mostly, I mean, yeah. But if I were to ask you, say, Melissa there, or 한주선 학생 here, or 한대건 학생, or here, how do you quantify your own pleasure, your own happiness, your own satisfaction? That's a completely different thing. Yeah? Suppose that you go to Gangwonland and win, yeah, do a bit, no, you can't really, and then win a bit of that, yeah? It's a casino in the Gangwon province. How do you compare happiness derived from there with, suppose, going on a skiing trip to your holiday, to Muju Resort or somewhere like that with your friends, and just the happiness of going down that slope of that, really the steepest end of that resort, and then just you setting the foot out and go down. That sheer pleasure. You feel it. You know when you're happy. But how do you quantify that? And that's why I think utilitarianism failed more than anything else. Now, this is turning into a sort of a slight philosophy class, but bear with me for a second, okay? It's an age-old debate. And this even led to a wider debate regarding whether pleasure is a pleasure, whether you should classify different types of pleasure. John Stuart Mill, for example, called for a distinction between something called higher pleasure and lower pleasure. The pleasure from reading poetry or reading the verses of Iliad or Odyssey or those sort of literary pleasure, artistic pleasure, aesthetic pleasure, should that be counted in the same way as just going to a casino or just going to Spain and watching a bull being slaughtered by the there's a Spanish term for that, but you know that bullfighting, yeah, or stuff like that. And that's the reason why utilitarianism really didn't go anywhere after a while. We know that maximizing happiness of every member of the society is a good idea. It's a very good idea. It's just that we can't think of the actual mechanism and specifics to quantify how pleasurable one thing is to one person and to another. Quantifying is the difficult part. And the debate over how to measure happiness really led to nowhere And that's the reason why the economists now more or less abandon this idea of measuring happiness directly. Used to, at least. But then it is really making a recent comeback. It's the idea became rather popular since about, I would say, 2007, 8-ish. Does anyone know this Easterlin Paradox? Has anyone heard of this? The white man's burden, and etc., etc. No, no. Well, Easterlin Paradox says that beyond a certain point, an increase in a nation's GDP per capita has absolutely no effect on how happy the members of that society feels. So economic development doesn't go hand in hand necessarily with happiness. Like one of the happiest countries on earth is actually this little country called Bhutan. It's sort of to the north of Bangladesh and sort of the Assam province of India, and it's situated on the high hills of Himalayas. Nepal is to the west, Bhutan is to the right of it. Borders China, India, Bangladesh, and roughly that end. So very poor country. Its GDP is like nowhere near where we are. Yet, Bhutan is classified as one of the happiest countries on earth, while the most fashionable term to describe Korea at the moment is Haejoseon. There's something wrong there. So the idea of utility and happiness is an old concept, but it is currently making a comeback. So in economics, we're trying to devise this sort of a gross national happiness indicator. I'm not saying that it should be replaced by GDP per capita or anything like that. That's clearly going to be the main variable of interest, but you should look at other complementary data that captures how happy the individual members of the society feel as well. Okay? But for the remainder, we're going to follow the mainstream, traditional, classical approach to utility. Okay? Which says utility should only be seen as a mathematical tool to describe the preference relationship that we talked about. This has a huge implication regarding cardinality versus ordinality. 우리말로는 기수라고 하고요. 기수성, 이거는 서수성이라고 합니다. So, utility being a mathematical tool for preference relationship is based on the idea that only the order matters. In other words, X is preferred to Y and Y is preferred to Z. We give up on the idea of how much one good is preferred to another. So cardinality doesn't matter. So ordinality talks about the order, 서수성이라고 하잖아요. 우리말로 서, order, 그 차례, 순서할 때 서. And then cardinality, 기수성, 얼마나 그 숫자가 크냐, magnitude. Doesn't matter anymore. Cardinality is irrelevant. So utility is just a functional way, a mathematical way to describe the preference relationship that we talked about. So if you have a question, can I just hold on to you for 1 minute, okay? Yeah. So if we have a preference ordering, a consumer prefers bundle X to bundle Y to bundle 9, utility function does only this. It attaches a greater number to x than to y, than y to z. Doesn't. The magnitude, whether it's greater by 30, 40, 50, doesn't matter. So if you look at bundle ABC, suppose a consumer prefers A to B, then B to C. There's a function 1 that assigns values 3, 2, 1. Function 2 that assigns 17, 10, and 0.02. Function 3 that assigns -1, -2, -3. What I'm saying is, the current mainstream approach to economics says they are all equally useful. They all capture the same preference relationship. What this means is that there is no one unique way to describe one particular set of preferences. And now I can take your question. I think in that case we have to talk about, we have to bring uncertainty into it, because there's a probability of winning and not winning as well. So it's a choice under uncertainty, really. So once we do that, then within the current framework of utility, you can capture that. Because if you assign greater probability to a major candidate and very little probability of winning to another candidate, then your optimal choice would be to go for the other one. So if you can think of it as a certainty and then look at preference relationship, you can't really go anywhere. But once you begin to bring probability and uncertainty into it, then I think we can capture exactly the preference you're describing in that sort of situation. But that's a material for week 6. So people at the back are really bringing forward the material that I'm about to go through in about a few weeks' time. So thank you for taking the interest. But I think after that, if you're still unsure about that, then probably come to me at the end of the class, and then we can talk about that. Okay? So I'm going to finish my lecture here today. Okay? Before going on to the examples. What I'm saying is this. There is no one right utility function. Now, those of you who are from the maths department knows that exponential of x is greater than exponential of y if x is greater than y. Yep. Or if you take a log of x, that will also be greater than log of y if x is greater than y. Now, do you see the point? They all preserve the same order. Correct? Order doesn't change. Magnitude changes a lot, but the order is preserved. Now, if you apply a new function to this xy consumption bundles, but the order itself is preserved, we call that something called a monotonic transformation. Log x. Suppose if x is bigger than y, then 2x is clearly going to be bigger than 2y. Yeah? So just like that. You can think of lots and lots of different ways of monotonic transformation. Here's the key thing. As long as the order remains the same, they are all valid utility functions to describe the same preference. In other words, you can't think of preference and utility as one-to-one mapping. This monotonic transformation actually helps you to simplify what's a seemingly complicated situation. Generally, if you take logs, then things become a lot easier when you try and differentiate and stuff like that. But here's my point that I want you to take away, and I'm going to finish the lecture about 10 minutes early now. One thing that I really highlight again and again and again is this. In the 19th and 20th century, when we said quantifying happiness is an important aspect, utility function had to be unique. There had to be one right way to measure a person's happiness and measure a person's utility. We are not talking about that anymore in economics. What we are saying is whether consumer prefers X to Y, whether consumer prefers Y to Z, that order is the only interesting and important and relevant thing. As long as a utility function can represent that order and preserve it in a mathematical way, it's a valid utility function. And if there's another utility function that does exactly the same job, so be it. That's also equally valid. So you can't now think of utility in terms of just measuring happiness. Just think of it as a way to mathematically capture and deal with that preference relationship we've been talking about on Wednesday. Okay? Then now we can talk about utility function next week and begin to talk about optimality. So I'm going to end this lecture here just a little early. Hope you have a great weekend and see you next Wednesday. Bye.